Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. History has the habit of repeating itself. And those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. I was fascinated with this video clip of how the whites in the southern states in America in post-slave abolition reinstated slavery by the Jim Crow laws. And in this particular case, specifically looking at the land issue, I'll just play a few minutes of this clip and then we'll discuss it.
There was a brief moment when the federal government considered actually redistributing land to formerly enslaved people. General William Tecumseh Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15, issued in January of 1865, set aside confiscated and abandoned land along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for black families. 40 acres per family. This is where the phrase 40 acres and a mule comes from. For a brief window, it looked as though the formerly enslaved would enter freedom as landowners. President Andrew Johnson reversed the order within the year. The land was returned to its former Confederate owners. The black families who had already moved onto it, built homes on it, planted crops on it, were evicted. That moment, the moment when the federal government had the land, had the legal authority, had the opportunity to fundamentally restructure the economic position of 4 million newly freed people, and chose instead to hand the land back to the men who had enslaved them. That moment set the trajectory for the following century. Without land, freedom became a different kind of trap. Sharecropping filled the vacuum. Under sharecropping, a black family would work a plot of land owned by a white landowner, and at the end of the season, the harvest would be divided according to an agreement. Typically, the landowner taking half or more, with the sharecropper responsible for his own seed, tools, and supplies, usually purchased on credit from a store the landowner also owned. The landowner kept the books. The landowner decided what the crop sold for. The landowner decided what the supplies cost. The sharecropper had no access to the ledger, no legal standing to dispute it, and absolutely no recourse if the numbers, year after year, somehow never quite balanced in his favor. This was not occasional dishonesty. This was the system working as intended. A sharecropper who ended the year in debt to his landlord could not legally leave to seek work elsewhere. Many states passed immigrant agent laws specifically criminalizing the recruitment of indebted laborers by other employers. He was bound to the land, bound to the debt, bound to the man who controlled both. It was slavery's economic logic, repackaged for a world that had technically outlawed slavery. And yet, against this, some black families did manage to acquire land.
We'll stop it there. That the trap has been repeated in history so many, many times. In Zimbabwe, we are seeing that repetition taking place. Before independence, the whites, colonial rulers, designated the rural areas, the tribal trust lands. And in these, the rural people were never to own any land. They could never be given title deeds to even 1 acre of land. The whole land was held in trust. That's why it was tribal trust lands. When somebody, yes, the late John Robertson, presented a paper to Ian Smith and argued that giving these rural people title deeds to even 1 acre of land would encourage them to do more with that land, to build decent homes for themselves. It made sense. It's common sense. Ian Smith said no, for one reason. He feared that economically empowering the blacks would encourage them to seek political empowerment. Ian Smith was not ready to give the blacks a meaningful vote. End of story. Interestingly enough, the War of Independence, as far as the rural people were concerned, was over land. They too wanted to own land. And after independence, Zanu PF did nothing on that score. To this day, Zanu PF stubbornly refused to give the people in the rural areas land. For the same selfish economic and political reasons that the whites had done. History has got a habit of repeating itself. This is what is happening in Zimbabwe today. Benjamin, welcome to the program.
Good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. That's a very interesting video that you've just played. And, I have to agree with you there to say what history has a habit of repeating itself. And with Zimbabwe, I think everything that was said in that piece, explains us to the T. But, my problem is how many people actually do realize that they are actually enslaved by Zanu PF? That ownership means title deeds. I mean, a lot of people, there's so many documents that, are going the rounds in Zimbabwe, sessions and so forth. When you don't have a title deed, you basically don't own that land that you are currently occupying. I mean, we have seen once, for example, a Chinese national, discovers some form of mineral in and around your stand, you are booted straight out. That is, you gone. Go, go, go. They don't care about your whatever you have developed or whatever you have built during that time. You must just take your little things and be out. And many Zimbabweans have failed to understand that part. 46 years in, you still don't have a title to your land that you have developed, no matter how small it is. And yet this was one of the pillars why the second Shimrenga was actually fought, to return the land back to its rightful owners, to have an equal share of Zimbabwe. A lot of people don't know. Hence you find, even at independence, or years just after independence, nobody asked the question to say, hey, but hold on a minute. We sacrificed for this land. When are we actually going to do something about having this land and address, the important stuff? It's sad, just like the slavery times, many people did not actually see the trap, and you know, eventually worked themselves to death for somebody as, you know, enrichment.
You heard that right. Today, you can get these German-made autofocus glasses for just £7.50. This batch was...
My apologies.
Or the possibility of advancement. In the textile...
The important issue, one of the key issues here is post-independence. Zanu PF and the ruling elite have taken back the land, particularly more concertedly since 2000. And most of the seized former white-owned farms have been dished out and given to the ruling elite and their cronies. Here is Mnangagwa standing in the middle of one of his farms, a maize field. As you can see, stretching to the horizon. His farm is extensive. He has got cattle of various breeds. He has got fish ponds and do a lot other things as well. And he has got title deeds to these farms. Many of them, in fact, have got multiple farms. Some of the ruling elite got the farms but failed to make good use of them. And this is not just a picture. It was repeated several times. This is a farm that used to grow oranges before it was taken over by Zanu PF leader. And within a few years, all the trees were dead. That is the reality. But nonetheless, these ruling elite and their cronies did get the farms and did get the title deeds. And the regime has stubbornly refused to give the rural people even title deeds to even 1 acre of land. And it was all done for the same selfish political reasons. Here is Margaret Dongo, herself a former Zanu PF MP, and then became an independent one. She understood what Zanu PF was doing. And she was not afraid to say so.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for Zanu PF? 1, they're intimidated. 2, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor, because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. Zanu PF will never have control over them.
the former white slave owners, slave masters, reinstituted slavery after it was abolished through these Jim Crow laws, where as a black former slave, you could never earn enough money to buy your own land. You were forever indebted to the former white landowners. A repeat of the same thing is happening in Zimbabwe. As much as the rural people fought for land, one man, one vote, and all other basic freedoms and human rights and dignity, Zanu PF is making sure that they will never get there. The regime is deliberately keeping the poor and politically powerless. The rural people are nothing more than serfs, modern day serfs, forever beholden politically to the Zanu PF ruling elite and their proxies in the form of the chiefs, the village heads, the war veterans. Politically, Zanu PF is holding the rural voters, and they constitute 60% of the voters out there in Zimbabwe. They're holding them hostage. And this is one of the reasons why Zanu PF has managed to retain absolute power in Zimbabwe. One of the consequences of the regime having this inbuilt majority is that it has been able to do as it damn well pleased. Right now, the nation is grappling with the consequences of Zanu PF passing this constitutional amendment bill number 3, which is effectively giving Mnangagwa 2 more years over and above what the Constitution allowed, and is giving Zanu PF thugs even greater dictatorial powers. That is the tragedy we are dealing with here.
You know, we also have to take ownership of our circumstances and what is happening to us, because you know it's not as if everything is being done under the table. I mean, Zanu PF is practically bragging and showing off. Look, they have just given themselves title deeds to the vast tracts of land that they took over from the white farmers. They legally own it. They can now sell it if they please. They can now go and get loans on the property. You know, whereas everybody else that is in the rural areas, they cannot do that because legally it is not theirs. There is nobody that is going to invest in somebody that is just keeping, you know, a place for somebody else. In essence, you are bound to say, whenever they decide they don't want you there, you have to leave. So you are protecting somebody else's property. This is why you find most rural homes are still not developed, because most of them are poor. Some of them that do understand that you cannot put permanent structures to something that is not permanently yours. So there's very little development moving in the rural areas. This is where you find, I'll paint you a much vivid picture. If a chief or a headman, a village headman, says that you need to have your name, in the Zanu PF books, everybody will run to go and get their names in that book. Why? It is because they have that understanding that they can lose that land. What they don't know is they fought for the land and it is legally supposed to be their inheritance. Everybody who calls themselves Zimbabwean, who should be, an heir to the land that they are currently occupying, because this is what their forefathers and they themselves actually fought for. We cannot then pretend to be ignorant and naive. I think, there has to be a point where we say something triggers Zimbabweans to realize that, hold on a minute, this is not what we fought for. This is not the Zimbabwe that we want, where now the rich and the Zanu PF famous can now do what they please with their, with our inheritance. They won't sell theirs. I mean, even if a Chinese was to discover gold, platinum, or whatever in their land, they would refuse that land to be touched. But yours, no problem. We'll just push you away. Go and find someone. The best thing they can do is we'll look for you somewhere else to go and build. This one here is no longer yours. And they walk away. I think, as Zimbabweans, we need to start taking ownership of our circumstances and try and dust ourselves from this, debt that we are in, and say, this is our right. We fought for this land. We must also have an equal share to our inheritance. That is my message to each and every one of us. We need to start taking responsibility and get ourselves out of this mess.
I've got on the screen there a picture, and it's telling a story of Abraham Lincoln. One of the things that he said in his speech in Springfield, Illinois, in June 1858, was that a house divided cannot stand. And what he was talking about is that America could not survive as a nation when half the population is free and the other half are slaves. He used that speech to justify the abolition of slavery. In many ways, we are facing the same thing in Zimbabwe. As much as Zimbabweans would want to believe that we are an independent nation, we are just a divided nation. with 60% of the population, they are no more than just modern day serfs, beholden to a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime that is holding them hostage and the nation and the nation to ransom. Zanu PF is not going to let the rural people free, because that is power base. Zanu PF has been saying it, and unashamedly too, that the rural areas is his stronghold because it holds the rural folk to ransom. The real tragedy here is that many Zimbabweans out there, well educated, have failed to see the contradiction. We are a house divided. Zanu PF is holding 60% of the nation to ransom. That is the reality. And we need to deal with it. It's amazing. I think what is also equally interesting here is that the white slave owners, slave masters, were whites enslaving blacks. What we are seeing in Zanu PF is the equivalent of a black person enslaving a fellow black. That is the reality of our political situation in Zimbabwe. We fought to end white colonial oppression and exploitation. And in 1980, yes, we removed the white oppressors, but only to inherit a black oppressor. Zanu PF has retained the same oppressive laws and practices that the white colonial rulers had instituted for selfish political and economic gain. And they have, in Zanu PF, retained the same things for the same selfish economic and political gains. And this is what I find most annoying about it. The overwhelming majority of Zimbabwe's so-called intellectuals have not seen it, or they've chosen to do nothing about it. 46 years after independence, 60% of the nation's population is still being held in bondage. And we are doing nothing about it. Shame on you. Shame on us all. Good night.